3 siblings set sail but never returned, vanishing without a trace, as if swallowed by the waters off the Australian coast. But 12 years later, their father makes a haunting discovery, uncovering what really happened to them. The small coastal town of Derby, Australia, was bathed in a warm midday sun as Graham Ellery stepped out of his modest weatherboard house. At 58, his face bore the deep creases of a man who had endured more than his fair share of life's cruelties. His eyes, once bright with optimism, had dulled over the years, clouded by alcohol and grief. "Going to drown yourself in another bottle, are you?" Marla Ellery's voice cut through the still air from the doorway behind him. Her tone was sharp, edged with 12 years of accumulated resentment. Graham didn't turn around. "Leave it, Marla." "Leave it? That's all you ever do, Graham. Leave everything to me while you waste our money getting drunk at all hours." Marla stepped onto the porch, her work uniform already on, ready for her shift at the local restaurant. At 56, she carried herself with a rigid dignity, her hair pulled back severely from a face that had once softened at the sight of him. "I'm not doing this now," Graham muttered, continuing down the path toward the street. "Of course not. You're never doing anything except feeling sorry for yourself," Marla called after him. "It's been 12 years, Graham, 12 years. I'm grieving too, but I didn't turn into a pathetic drunk." Graham whirled around, his face flushed. "You think I don't know how long it's been?" "Every single day, Marla, every single day I wake up and remember they're gone." "And you think I don't?" Marla's voice cracked. "But I still get up, I still work, I still live." "This isn't living," Graham gestured between them. "This is surviving." "Then survive, be a man, and get some work," Marla snapped. "Stop wasting the money I earn cleaning up after tourists and feeding drunks like you." Graham waved her off and turned away. As he trudged down the path, he heard the front door slam behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. The sound was so familiar, it barely registered anymore. He felt the eyes of neighbors on him as he walked. Mrs. Patterson was watering her garden, deliberately avoiding his gaze. The Collins family hushed their conversation as he passed. "What are you all looking at?" Graham called out suddenly, his voice louder than intended. "Enjoying the show, are you?" Mrs. Patterson quickly retreated indoors, while Mr. Collins muttered something to his wife before guiding her inside as well. Graham knew they all pitied him, the father whose 3 children had vanished on a sailing trip 12 years ago. In a town this small, everyone knew everyone's business, and his family's tragedy had been the talk of Derby for the first year. Now it was just a sad footnote, a cautionary tale parents told their children about the dangers of the Kimberley coast. As he walked the familiar route to his regular bar, the Boab Tree, Graham's mind drifted back to Detective Angus Marr's words when the case had officially gone cold after just 6 months. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ellery, but we've exhausted all leads," Marr had said, not quite meeting his eyes. "These waters can be treacherous, sudden storms, strong currents. It's most likely the boat capsized and, well, nature took its course." Graham had punched a hole in the police station wall that day. It had earned him a night in the cells and hadn't brought his children back. Now, as he approached the Boab Tree, he found the doors locked and the lights off. A small sign in the window read, "Monday, open from 4 p.m. "Bloody hell," Graham muttered, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. He'd forgotten what day it was again. The drinks were already blurring together, days into nights into days. He turned toward the harbor instead, thinking of the Anchor, another bar that opened earlier. His mind wandered as he walked, remembering the last time he'd seen his children. Noah, 25 and confident, with his father's adventurous spirit. Lena, 22, serious and thoughtful. And Chloe, 20, still carrying the sunshine of youth in her smile. "Make sure you're back for dinner," he'd called out as they'd headed down to the docks, Noah leading his sisters with that cocky grin of his. "Your mother's making her special roast." "We'll be back before sunset, Dad," Noah had promised, his holiday hat pulled low over his eyes. Just a quick sail around the bay. They never came back. Graham's reminiscing had led him astray, and he realized he'd taken a wrong turn. Instead of approaching the anchor, he found himself near a small stretch of beach, where a weathered fisherman's cabin stood, partially hidden by scrubby coastal vegetation. Something about the cabin sparked recognition. Graham narrowed his eyes, watching as a man worked outside, mending what looked like fishing nets. The man was in his mid-30s, tanned and lean. With a jolt, Graham realized who it was, one of Noah's friends, a young man who had often come to their house for dinner, sometimes even staying over when his own home situation had been difficult. For some reason, this man had never come forward during the search for his children. He'd never offered help or information, never even attended the memorial service they'd held a year after the disappearance. How strange that Graham had never noticed this absence until now. Graham hesitated, then decided to approach. The man was focused on his task, unaware of Graham's presence, until he knocked on one of the wooden support posts of the cabin's small porch. The man looked up, surprise flashing across his face, quickly followed by something that looked unsettlingly like fear. "I'm sorry," Graham said, struggling to recall the young man's name. "You're Noah's friend, aren't you? I can't seem to remember your name." "Callum," the man replied after a pause that stretched a bit too long. "Callum Rourke." "Callum, right?" Graham repeated, the name unlocking more memories. "Sorry about that. My manners aren't what they used to be." He extended his hand. "Been a long time." Callum wiped his palm on his shorts before taking Graham's hand in a grip that was neither firm nor welcoming. "It has?" Graham noticed how Callum's eyes darted past him, as if looking for someone else. "I was heading to the bar, but I think I got turned around. Ended up here instead." Callum pointed vaguely back the way Graham had come. "The anchor's that way, about 5 minutes' walk." "Right, thanks." Graham should have left then, but something held him there. "You know, I was just thinking about Noah. You two were close, weren't you? Used to come round for dinner once a week?" Callum's posture stiffened. "Yeah, we were good mates." "Funny," Graham said. "I don't recall seeing you after what happened?" Callum looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. It was hard for everyone. An awkward silence settled between them. Then, to Callum's surprise, Graham nodded toward the cabin door. "Mind if I come in for a bit? It's been a while since we caught up, and I could use a good chat." Callum hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, sure." As Callum led the way inside, Graham couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Callum was too nervous, too stilted for this to be a simple reunion between a father and his missing son's friend. The interior of Callum's cabin was sparsely furnished, but neat. A worn couch sat against one wall. A small wooden table with 2 mismatched chairs occupied the center of the room, and a compact kitchenette took up one corner. The space smelled of salt, fish, and coffee. "Have a seat," Callum said, gesturing to one of the chairs. Graham settled onto it, the wooden frame creaking under his weight. He watched as Callum went through the motions of making coffee, his movements precise but tense, like a man performing under surveillance. "So," Graham began, attempting to ease the strained atmosphere. "You've been here long?" "About 10 years, Callum replied, keeping his back to Graham as he spooned ground coffee into a battered percolator. "Bought this place cheap after working on the fishing boats for a while." "Good life, is it? Living by the sea? Simple? Quiet?" Callum's answers were clipped, offering no invitation for further conversation. Graham tried again. "Must have been hard for you, too, losing Noah like that. You two were inseparable." Callum's shoulders hunched slightly. "Like I said, it was hard for everyone." "Strange, though," Graham persisted. "Everyone else who knew Noah came forward during the search. His school friends, his workmates, even that girl he dated for 2 weeks when he was 16. Everyone except you. The percolator began to bubble noisily, giving Callum an excuse to remain silent as he focused on pouring the coffee into 2 chipped mugs. He placed one in front of Graham before sitting down across from him, his own mug held between both hands as if seeking warmth despite the mild temperature. "I wasn't in a good place then," Callum finally said. "Didn't know what to say, how to help in a meaningful way." Graham nodded slowly, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. As he set the mug down, his gaze drifted to a small cabinet against the wall. On top sat a framed photograph that caught his attention. Graham squinted, then rose from his seat to get a closer look. It was a photo of his 3 children on a sailboat. Noah sat on the left, easily recognizable by his signature holiday hat and wide grin, with one arm slung comfortably around Lena, who was in the center, wearing a red sundress. Chloe sat to Lena's right, her bright smile matching the others, all 3 of them caught mid-laughter by the camera. Graham's heart clenched. He knew that boat. It was the very one they'd vanished on. "Where did you get this?" Graham asked, his voice suddenly hoarse. Callum remained seated, his knuckles white around his mug. "Noah gave it to me." "No?" Graham picked up the frame, studying it closely. "This was taken the day they disappeared. Look at what they're wearing. These are the same clothes they were reported missing in—" He turned to face Callum. "Were you there that day?" Callum's eyes flickered to the door, then back to Graham. "I took the picture." "You ... Graham set the frame down carefully, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. "You were with them when they disappeared?" Callum said nothing, but his breathing had quickened. 12 years, Graham said, his voice dangerously quiet. 12 years I've been living in hell, not knowing what happened to my children, and you were there? You saw what happened and never said a word?" "It's not like that," Callum protested weakly. Graham crossed the small room in 2 strides, grabbing Callum by the collar and yanking him to his feet. Coffee splashed across the table as Callum's mug toppled over. "Then what is it like?" Graham growled, his face inches from Callum's. "Tell me now, or I swear to God I'll drag you to the police station myself." "You don't understand," Callum gasped, not resisting Graham's grip. "They'll kill me if I talk." "Who will? Who are they?" Graham demanded. Callum's resistance crumbled. "Let me go, and I'll tell you everything." Graham released him with a shove, and Callum stumbled back against the wall. For a moment, Graham thought the younger man might make a run for it, but instead, Callum sank back into his chair, head in his hands. "It started about 6 months before they disappeared," Callum began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Noah and we had a deal with some Indonesian fishermen. They'd drop packages offshore, and we'd pick them up in the sailboat and take them to Hidden Reef Cay. Someone would meet us there to collect them." "What kind of packages?" Graham asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Drugs," Callum admitted. "Smuggled in from Indonesia. They were destined for some biker gangs here in Derby, but the handoff happened at the Cay." Graham's fists clenched at his sides. "You got my son involved in drug smuggling?" Callum looked up, a flash of defiance in his eyes. "It wasn't me. Noah was the one who knew the bikers. He approached me because I had sailing experience. He asked me to teach him, said there was good money in it." Graham shook his head, unwilling to believe that his son, his good, adventurous boy, could have been involved in something so dangerous and illegal. "You're lying." "I'm not," Callum insisted. "Noah was smart, but he got greedy. We'd been doing the runs for months without any problems. The money was good, really good. But that last day—" He trailed off, swallowing hard. "What happened that last day?" Graham demanded. "Noah brought his sisters along," Callum said, regret etched into his features. "I told him not to. I told him it was too risky, especially with the kind of people we were dealing with. but he insisted it would be fine. Said they'd swim and enjoy the sun at the quay while he did the handoff. They wouldn't suspect a thing. Graham felt sick. The thought of Noah deliberately endangering Lena and Chloe was almost too much to bear. And then? I don't know exactly what went down that day, Callum continued. I left early with the sailboat, heading back to the mainland. Noah asked me to pick them up at 3 in the afternoon, said they'd spend a few hours at the quay. But you never went back for them, Graham said, realization dawning. Callum shook his head. Before I could, 2 of the gang members showed up at my place. They knew where I lived. They told me that my friends didn't need picking up, and when I asked what that meant, they told me not to ask too many questions unless I wanted to join them. And you just accepted that? Graham's voice rose in disbelief. You didn't go to the police? You didn't try to find out what happened to them? I was scared, Callum exclaimed. These weren't ordinary criminals, Graham. These were dangerous people with connections everywhere. When I heard the news about the disappearance, I knew it had to do with the deliveries in the gang. I wanted to come forward, but they made it clear what would happen if I talked. Graham stared at Callum, a man who had once been welcome in his home, who had eaten at his table, who had been treated almost like another son. Now he saw nothing but a coward, a man who had valued his own safety over the lives of 3 young people. You let my children disappear, Graham said, his voice trembling with rage. You let us suffer for 12 years, not knowing if they were alive or dead, while you've been living here? What, fishing and pretending nothing happened? I'm sorry, Callum whispered. I was young and stupid and scared. And now you're older but still a mute. Sorry won't bring my children back, Graham snapped. His eyes landed on a bottle of beer on Callum's kitchen counter, and he snatched it up without hesitation. You're pathetic. As Graham moved toward the door, Callum rose to his feet. Please, Graham, don't go to the police. If you do, they'll know I told you something. They'll come after me. You should have thought of that 12 years ago, Graham replied coldly. You're a coward, Callum Rourke, a goddamn coward. With that, Graham yanked open the door and stepped outside, leaving Callum standing in the middle of his cabin, surrounded by the wreckage of his secrets. Graham walked away from Callum's cabin, his mind reeling with what he'd just learned. The beer bottle gripped tightly in his hand was a familiar comfort, and he twisted off the cap, taking a long pull of the lukewarm liquid. One bottle wouldn't make him drunk, but it might take the edge off the rage and disbelief coursing through him. Noah, his son, his responsible, ambitious son, had been involved in drug smuggling. It seemed impossible, yet it explained so much. The sudden influx of cash Noah had claimed came from odd jobs, the secretive phone calls, the unexplained absences. And now, after 12 years of believing his children had been victims of the sea's cruelty, Graham learned they might have been victims of human malice instead. He needed to tell Marla. Whatever their problems, she deserved to know the truth about their children. Graham fumbled for his phone and dialed her number, but the call went straight to voicemail. Damn it, he muttered, remembering she was at work. Marla had taken a job as a kitchen hand at the Perler, an upscale restaurant catering to tourists, shortly after the children disappeared. It had started as a way to keep busy during the endless days of waiting for news, then became a necessity as Graham's drinking worsened and his carpentry work dried up. Graham changed course, heading toward the restaurant instead of home. The Perler was on the opposite side of town, facing the harbor where wealthy visitors docked their yachts. As he walked, Graham rehearsed what he would say to Marla. How could he tell her that their son had been involved in something so dangerous, that he might have inadvertently led his sisters into danger? The restaurant was busy with the lunchtime rush when Graham arrived. Through the large front windows, he could see waiters in crisp white shirts moving efficiently between tables. He pushed open the door and was immediately met by a hostess with a polite smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "I need to speak with Marla Ellery," Graham said. "She works in the kitchen. It's important. Family business." The hostess's smile faltered. I'm afraid staff aren't available during service hours. Perhaps you could come back after—" "This can't wait," Graham interrupted. "Just tell her Graham's here." "Sir, I can't disturb the kitchen during—" "It's about our children," Graham insisted, loud enough that nearby diners glanced over curiously. The restaurant manager appeared at the hostess's side, a tall man with a carefully trimmed beard and concerned eyes. "Is there a problem here?" "I need to see my wife," Graham repeated. "Marla Ellery. It's urgent." The manager frowned. "Mr. Ellery, we're in the middle of lunch service. Whatever it is, surely it can wait an hour or two?" "No, it can't," Graham insisted, his patience wearing thin. 12 years we've been waiting. I'm not waiting another hour." The manager looked like he was about to argue further when Marla appeared in the doorway leading to the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She must have heard the commotion. "Graham?" Her expression was a mixture of annoyance and concern. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," he said. "Now." Marla glanced at the manager, who sighed and nodded reluctantly. 10 minutes, Marla. We're swamped back there." "This way," she said to Graham, leading him to a small staff area at the back of the restaurant. Once they were alone, she crossed her arms defensively. "If you're drunk again, Graham, I swear—" "I'm not drunk," he cut in, holding up the beer bottle. "1 beer, that's all. And that's not what this is about." Marla's eyes narrowed, taking in his agitated state. "Then what? What was so important you had to come barging into my workplace?" Graham took a deep breath. "I found out what happened to the kids." Marla's arms dropped to her sides, her face paling. "What? How? When?" "I ran into Callum Rourke today," Graham explained. "Noah's friend, remember him? The fishing kid who used to come for dinner?" Marla nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Graham's face. "He was there, Marla. He was with them the day they disappeared." Graham went on to tell her everything Callum had revealed about the drug smuggling, Noah's involvement, the biker gang, and Callum's cowardice. As he spoke, Marla's expression transformed from shock to disbelief to a deep, visceral pain. By the time he finished, she had sunk onto a nearby chair, her hand pressed against her mouth. "No," she whispered. "Not Noah. He wouldn't do something like that. He wouldn't put his sisters in danger." "That's what I thought too," Graham said. "But it makes sense, Marla. The new clothes, the cash he always seemed to have, those sailing trips that got more and more frequent." Tears welled in Marla's eyes. "If this is true, if Noah was involved in drug smuggling and something went wrong, then they might not be lost at sea. They might be—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "We need to go to the police," Graham said firmly. "Tell them what Callum told me. They can reopen the case." Marla stood abruptly. "I'm coming with you. Let me talk to my manager." She disappeared back into the restaurant, returning minutes later, having changed out of her kitchen uniform into her street clothes. He's not happy, but he understands. Family emergency. Together they left the Perler and began walking toward the police station. As they neared their home, which lay on the route, Graham took out his phone and tried to call Detective Marr, who had handled their children's case years ago. The call went straight to voicemail. "No answer," Graham reported, slipping the phone back into his pocket. As they approached their modest weatherboard house, Graham noticed something odd. The front door was slightly ajar, the lock splintered as if forced. "Did you leave the door open?" Graham asked, his voice tense. Marla shook his head. "And I definitely didn't break the lock." They approached cautiously. The neighborhood was quiet in the early afternoon, most residents away at work. Graham pushed the door open wider, stepping into the familiar living room. Nothing appeared disturbed at first glance. The worn furniture was in place, Graham's reading glasses still on the side table where he'd left them that morning. But there were subtle signs that someone had been there. Faint shoe prints on the wooden floor, too large to be either Graham's or Marla's, and the bedroom door standing open when Marla always kept it closed during the day. "Someone's been in our house," Marla whispered, clutching Graham's arm. "Should we call the police?" Before Graham could answer, she was already moving toward the bedroom, drawn by maternal instinct to check if anything had been disturbed in what had once been their children's rooms, preserved like shrines to their memory. "Graham, come here," Marla called, her voice tight with fear. Graham hurried to the bedroom, his heart pounding. Marla stood at the foot of their bed, pointing to something that hadn't been there when they'd left that morning, a rectangular package wrapped in brown paper and a white envelope placed neatly on top of their quilt. "Don't touch it," Graham warned, approaching slowly. "We don't know what it is." Marla wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warmth of the day. Who would break into our house to leave a package, and why today, of all days? Graham's mind raced. It couldn't be a coincidence that someone had entered their home the same day he'd confronted Callum about the children's disappearance. "Callum must have called someone after I left," Graham muttered. "Told them I knew about the drug smuggling." "But who?" "After 12 years, who would care enough to break in?" Marla asked. Graham reached for the envelope, ignoring Marla's protest. He tore it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The message was typed in plain black font. "We know what you know. Keep it to yourself. Don't go to the police, or there will be consequences." Graham handed the note to Marla, who read it with widening eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered. "They're still out there. The people who took our children are still out there, and now they know we're onto them." Graham turned his attention to the package. It was about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in brown paper and sealed with packing tape. Something about it sent a chill down his spine. "We should call the police," Marla insisted. "Let them handle this. What if it's dangerous?" But Graham was already reaching for the package, his anger overriding caution. "Graham, please," Marla pleaded. "Don't open it. We don't know what it is." Graham hesitated, looking at his wife's frightened face. Then he thought of Noah, Lena, and Chloe, of 12 years without knowing what had happened to them. His resolve hardened. "If these are the people who took our children, I want to know exactly what we're dealing with," he said grimly. He went to the kitchen and returned with a small utility knife. Before Marla could protest further, he sliced through the tape and peeled back the brown paper. Inside was a plastic-wrapped brick of white powder. "What the—" Graham stared at it in confusion. Marla gasped. "Is that what I think it is?" Graham carefully cut a small slit in the plastic wrap and touched the tip of his finger to the powder. He brought it to his tongue, then quickly spat. "Cocaine, I think, or heroin, something like that." Marla backed away from the bed. "Why would they leave drugs in our house? What is this, some kind of sick joke?" Graham's mind worked furiously. "No, it's a message, and a trap." He rewrapped the package carefully. "Think about it, Marla. If we go to the police now, we're the ones holding a kilo of drugs. Who's going to believe that someone broke in just to plant it? Sure, there's evidence of the break-in and that shoe print, but let's be honest. I've got a reputation in this town. Most folks see me as the local drunk." "So what do we do?" Marla asked, her voice trembling. "These people, whoever they are, they broke into our home. They know where we live. They're watching us. I think this is a show of power." Graham paced the small bedroom, running a hand through his hair. "We can't keep this here. If anyone found it, we'd be arrested." "We can't throw it away either," Marla pointed out. "What if someone finds it? Or what if it's a test? What if they're watching to see what we do with it?" Graham stopped pacing, his decision made. "We take it to the police, tonight. We tell them everything. About Callum, about the break-in, about the note. We bring the drugs as evidence." "But the note? The consequences?" "What more can they take from us, Marla?" Graham asked bitterly. "They already took our children." Marla was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the package on their bed. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, we go to the police. But we go now, not tonight. I'm not staying in this house a minute longer, knowing they can get in whenever they want." Graham agreed. He found a reusable shopping bag in the kitchen and carefully placed the drug package inside. As they prepared to leave, Marla went to her closet and took out an old metal box. She unlocked it and removed a small revolver. "Dad's old gun," she explained, seeing Graham's surprised expression. "I've kept it loaded, just in case." "You know how to use that thing?" Graham asked, eyeing the weapon warily. "Dad taught me," Marla replied, slipping the gun into her purse. "Let's hope I don't have to prove it." They left the house, Graham carrying the bag with the drugs, Marla clutching her purse tightly. Their car was parked in the driveway, an old Toyota that had seen better days but still ran reliably. Graham stowed the bag in the trunk, and they got in, both scanning the quiet street for any sign of surveillance. "Straight to the police station," Graham said as he started the engine. "No stops? No detours?" Marla nodded, her knuckles white as she gripped her purse. As they pulled away from the house, neither spoke. The weight of what they were carrying, both physically and emotionally, pressed down on them, creating a tense silence that filled the car. They had driven about halfway to the police station when flashing lights appeared in their rearview mirror. A police cruiser was signaling for them to pull over. "What now?" Graham muttered, easing the car to the curb. "It's just a routine check," Marla said, though her voice betrayed her nervousness. "Stay calm." Two officers approached, one on each side of the car. The taller one, on Graham's side, tapped on the window. "License and registration, please," he requested after Graham rolled down the window. Graham fumbled in the glove compartment for the papers while explaining, "Officer, we're actually on our way to the police station. We have something important to report." The officer, his name badge read Reeves, raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? And what would that be?" Before Graham could decide how much to reveal, the second officer, whose badge identified him as Torres, spoke from Marla's side. "Sir, would you mind if we take a look in your vehicle? We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area." Graham exchanged a worried glance with Marla. "I'm not sure that's necessary." "If you have nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem," Officer Reeves interrupted, his tone hardening slightly. Reluctantly, Graham agreed. They stepped out of the car, and Officer Reeves asked for the keys to open the trunk. Graham's heart sank as the officer discovered the shopping bag and pulled out the package of drugs. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Reeves whistled, showing the package to Torres. "That's not ours," Graham quickly explained. "Someone broke into our house and left it there with a threatening note. We were taking it to the station as evidence. There's been a development in our children's disappearance case. They went missing 12 years ago. We need to speak with Detective Angus Marr." The officers exchanged a significant look that Graham couldn't interpret. "Detective Marr, you say?" Officer Torres repeated. "That's interesting." "Look, we can explain everything at the station," Marla interjected. "We have reason to believe our children were abducted by drug smugglers." Officer Reeves carefully rewrapped the package and placed it back in the trunk. "I think it would be best if you followed us," he said, his tone suddenly more conciliatory. "Detective Marr isn't at the station right now, but we can take you directly to him." "He's expecting you?" Graham asked, surprised. "We'll call ahead," Torres assured them. "Just follow our patrol car, and we'll sort this all out." Graham and Marla returned to their car, both unsettled by the officer's change in demeanor. "Something feels wrong," Marla whispered as they pulled out behind the patrol car. How would they know to contact Marr specifically? And why not just escort us to the station? "I don't know," Graham admitted, keeping his eyes on the police car ahead. "But maybe Marr still has some connection to the case. Maybe they know something we don't." As they drove, Marla discreetly took a photo of the patrol car's license plate with her phone. "Just in case," she explained when Graham shot her a questioning look. The police car led them away from the route to the station, turning into a residential area Graham wasn't familiar with. They continued down increasingly quiet streets until they reached a neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The patrol car finally stopped in front of a single-story house set back from the road, surrounded by untrimmed bushes. There were no other houses nearby, just empty lots overgrown with weeds. "That's definitely not Mar's house," Graham said, his suspicion growing stronger. "I know where he lives, in the Bayside development, or at least where he used to live. This isn't it." Marla agreed. "I saw him at the market around that area once." The patrol car stopped, and the officers stepped out. Graham remained in the car, engine still running, hands tight on the steering wheel. "Graham," Marla whispered urgently, "I think we need to leave. I have a very bad gut feeling." Before Graham could decide, the officers approached, one on each side of their car. Graham cracked his window only slightly this time. "Is this Detective Mar's house?" he asked, knowing full well it wasn't. "Get out of the car, Mr. Ellery," Officer Reeves commanded, his friendly demeanor completely gone now. "Both of you, now." Graham's heart raced. "I don't think so. We're going to head back to the station and—" Before he could finish, Officer Reeves smashed his fist through the partially open window, sending glass shards flying across the interior. In the same motion, he reached in and unlocked the door, yanking it open. "Graham!" Marla screamed as Officer Torres did the same on her side. Graham tried to fight back, but Officer Reeves delivered a powerful punch to his temple, dazing him. Through blurred vision, he saw Marla struggling with Torres, reaching desperately for her purse where the gun was stored. Torres struck her hard across the face, and she slumped in her seat, unconscious. "Marla!" Graham bellowed, lurching forward as the world spun around him. Through the haze, his eyes locked onto the officer's face, just long enough to notice a distinct tattoo behind the man's ear, along with an old earring hole on his earlobe and another where a brow piercing had once been. Then Reeves struck again, a heavy blow to the back of Graham's head. The ground seemed to tilt beneath him as darkness surged in. The last thing he felt was the rough tug of hands dragging him from the car, his limbs limp, useless, refusing to respond to his silent, desperate commands to fight. When Graham regained consciousness, his senses returned one by one. First came the throbbing pain in his head, then the smell of dust and mildew, followed by the awareness that he was lying on a hard surface, his wrists and ankles bound with something that cut into his skin when he tried to move. He forced his eyes open, blinking until his vision cleared enough to take in his surroundings. He was in what appeared to be an old shack lying on a metal bed frame with a thin, stained mattress. Light filtered in through a small window, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. Through the window he could see a landscape of red cliffs, rivers, and dense bushland, unmistakably the Kimberley region, but far from Derby. Graham tested his restraints only to find that they tightened painfully with each movement. He stopped struggling and instead called out, his voice hoarse, "Hello? Is anyone there? Marla?" There was no response, no sign of his wife anywhere in the small shack. Fear for her safety sent a surge of adrenaline through him, and he called out again, louder this time. "Whoever you are, show yourselves. Where's my wife?" The shack door creaked open, and 3 men stepped inside. 2 of them were the imposter officers, Reeves and Torres, now clad in worn leather vests marked with a logo Graham didn't recognize. Reeves had reinserted his earrings, one in his lobe and another through his brow, giving him a more menacing edge. Between them stood a towering man with arms and neck inked in elaborate tattoos, his bald head catching the faint light as he surveyed the room with cold intensity. "Finally awake, are we?" the tattooed man said, his voice surprisingly soft for his intimidating appearance. "You've got a hard head, Mr. Ellery. Torres here was worried he'd hit you too hard." "Where's my wife?" Graham demanded, straining against his bonds. "And my children? What have you done with them?" The tattooed man laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Straight to the point. I like that. Your wife is safe. For now. As for your children, well, that's a longer story. You're not police, Graham spat, glaring at Reeves and Torres. You're the bikers Callum mentioned, aren't you? The drug smugglers. Such ugly labels, the tattooed man said, shaking his head. We prefer to think of ourselves as businessmen operating outside conventional regulations. What's your name? Graham asked, trying to gather as much information as possible. If you're going to kill me, I'd at least like to know who's responsible. The man paused, then gave a casual shrug. Fair enough. Name's Blades, he said, nodding toward his companions. You've already met Reeves and Torres. They did what they had to do to get you here quietly. Bit of dress-up never hurt anyone. Everyone loves a little cosplay, right? Why am I here? Graham asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Blades pulled up a rickety chair and sat facing Graham. You're here because you couldn't leave well enough alone. We left a very clear message at your home, yet you headed straight to the police station. That shows a remarkable lack of self-preservation, Mr. Ellery. Callum Rourke told you I was asking questions, Graham guessed. Blades nodded. Called us the minute you left his place, terrified out of his mind. Said you knew everything about the operation from 12 years ago and were planning to go to the police. Callum's always been a good boy, knows when to talk and when to stay quiet. What happened to my children? Graham asked, his voice breaking despite his efforts to remain strong. I need to know. Blades stood, pacing the small space. That's not really relevant anymore, is it? What matters is what happens now. He turned to Jake and Torres. Get the supplies from the truck. It's time to clean up this loose end. As the two men left, Blades leaned closer to Graham. You know, you could have had a comfortable life, kept the drugs we left you, sold them, made enough money to stop your wife from having to work in that restaurant. But you had to be noble, didn't you? Where is my wife? Graham repeated, fear for Marla overriding everything else. Blades straightened up as Jake and Torres returned, each carrying a red plastic gallon container. The sharp smell of gasoline filled the shack as they began to pour the liquid around the perimeter, soaking the wooden walls and floor. What are you doing? Graham asked, panic rising in his chest. Stop! Blades pulled a remote control from his pocket and pressed a button. A small television in the corner of the room that Graham hadn't noticed before flickered to life, showing grainy CCTV footage of a room. Inside were 3 women, 2 young adults and 1 older woman. It took Graham a moment to recognize them, Marla and what must be his daughters, though they were now grown women. Lena? Chloe? Graham gasped, tears springing to his eyes at the sight of his daughters, alive after all these years. Consider this my parting gift to you, Blades said, motioning toward the screen. One last look at them before you're gone. We'll take care of them once we've finished with you. Out here, no one's coming, no one to hear you scream, and no police for hundreds of kilometers, with nothing but ocean in between. Jake and Torres finished dousing the shack with gasoline, even soaking the mattress beneath Graham. They stepped outside while Blades remained, taking a lighter from his pocket. Any last words, Mr. Ellery? Blades asked, flipping the lighter open and closed. Graham stared at the screen, at his family, determination hardening within him. You won't get away with this. Blades laughed. We already have, for 12 years. He flicked the lighter, producing a flame, and tossed it onto the gasoline-soaked floor. Fire erupted immediately, racing along the path of fuel. Blades stepped outside, closing the door behind him, leaving Graham bound to the bed as flames began to climb the walls of the shack. The heat intensified rapidly as flames engulfed the shack. Graham's eyes watered from the thickening smoke, but he could still see the television showing his family. They were alive. Marla, Lena, and Chloe were alive and being held somewhere. The knowledge gave him renewed strength. He had to survive, had to escape to save them. He twisted against his restraints, ignoring the pain as they cut into his skin. The fire was spreading faster than he'd anticipated, flames already licking at the foot of the bed. Soon the mattress would catch, and he'd be burned alive. Graham scanned the area around him, desperate for anything that might help. His gaze landed on a rusted nail protruding from one of the wooden posts near the bed. If he could maneuver himself close enough, perhaps he could use it to fray the ropes. With a grunt of effort, Graham shifted his body, inching toward the post. The heat was becoming unbearable, sweat pouring down his face and stinging his eyes. He reached the nail and began rubbing the rope, binding his right wrist against it, working as quickly as possible. The smoke grew thicker, forcing Graham to keep his head low for cleaner air. His lungs burned with each breath, and his vision began to blur. Still, he continued sawing at the rope, feeling it gradually weaken against the nail's rough edge. "Come on," he gasped, redoubling his efforts as the fire spread to the mattress beneath him. The material began to smolder, and Graham knew he had only seconds before it burst into flames. Finally, the rope frayed enough for him to wrench his hand free. He immediately began working on the knot binding his other wrist, his fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. The knot loosened, and his left hand came free, just as flames caught the edge of the mattress. Graham quickly untied his ankles, then rolled off the bed onto the floor, where the smoke was slightly less dense. He crawled toward the door, but found it locked or barred from the outside. The window was his only option, small but possibly large enough for him to squeeze through. He staggered to his feet, coughing violently as he inhaled smoke. The fire had already consumed most of the shack's interior, leaving him a narrow path to the window. He grabbed the chair Blades had sat in and smashed it against the window, shattering the glass. Using the chair leg to clear the remaining shards, Graham prepared to climb out. A sudden explosion of flames from the mattress sent him stumbling forward, his jacket catching fire. Graham shouted in pain, desperately trying to pat out the flames as they spread to his pants. He lunged for the window, cutting his hands and arms on the remaining glass as he forced his upper body through the narrow opening. "Help!" he shouted, his voice weak and rasping. "Somebody help me!" The rest of his body was still inside the burning shack, the heat searing his legs even as he tried to wriggle through the window. His strength was failing, his consciousness slipping away from smoke inhalation and pain. Just as Graham was about to give up, he felt hands gripping his shoulders, pulling him from the window. He tumbled to the ground outside, his clothes still smoldering. His rescuer doused him with water, bucket after bucket, until the flames were extinguished. Graham rolled onto his back, gulping in the fresh air. Through blurred vision, he made out the figure standing over him, an elderly man with dark skin and weathered features, barefoot and dressed in simple clothes. "Thank you," Graham managed between coughs. The man crouched beside him, examining Graham's burns with a critical eye. "Bad burns," he said, his English heavily accented. "Need treatment or we'll get infected." Graham struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain from his burns. "Who are you? How did you find me?" "Mahmud," the man replied, pointing to himself. "Indonesian. I saw fire. Came to help." Graham looked back at the shack, now fully engulfed in flames. "Those men. They have my family, my wife and daughters. I need to find them." Mahmud shook his head. "First, we treat burns. If wounds turn black, then ooze, then infection, you die. And if you die, family never know you tried." The simple logic of this penetrated Graham's panic. He nodded weakly, allowing Mahmud to help him to his feet and guide him to an old pickup truck parked a short distance away. As they drove away from the burning shack, Graham noticed they were deep in the Kimberley wilderness, surrounded by red cliffs and scrubby bushland. They were far from Darby, possibly even on one of the countless islands or peninsulas that dotted the Kimberley coast. "Where are we going?" Graham asked, each word painful in his smoke-damaged throat. "River," Mahmud replied simply. "Clean water. Good for burns." Graham wanted to protest, to insist they immediately begin searching for his family, but he knew Mahmoud was right. He wouldn't be able to help anyone in his current condition. Better to recover some strength first, then figure out a plan. They drove for about 15 minutes before reaching a clearing near a river. The water looked clean and cool, a welcome sight to Graham's burning skin. Mahmoud helped him from the truck and down to the riverbank. "Soak in water," Mahmoud instructed. "I make medicine." Graham carefully waded into the river, sighing with relief as the cool water covered his burned skin. He remained there while Mahmoud busied himself gathering materials: eucalyptus leaves, which he crushed between his hands, and bark from a tea tree. Using dry kindling collected from around the clearing, Mahmoud started a small fire and began preparing some kind of ointment, mixing ash with the crushed plant materials. As Graham soaked his burns, he studied his unlikely savior. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "You said you're Indonesian. You're not from around here." Mahmoud continued his work, grinding the mixture with practiced hands. "I trafficked drug," he admitted, looking up to meet Graham's eyes. "That makes me evil. Your children, boy one, he died. Men killed him, push him off cliff." He pointed to a distant cliff face overlooking the river. "River has lots of crocodile there. Heard you're the father. Maybe saving you restores a little of it." Graham stared at him, shock and grief washing over him. "Noah? They killed Noah?" Mahmoud nodded solemnly. "Long time ago." "I see. I not stop it. This my punishment now." "You were involved in the drug trafficking?" Graham asked, trying to make sense of the connection. "With Blades and his men?" "For a long time your son and friend helped," Mahmoud confirmed. "My country wanted me dead penalty there. Cannot return. This not my plan. I stopped traffic drug. Drug men searched me. Wanted me dead. I hide very long time." Graham stepped out of the river, his mind racing. "How did you know I was here? Did you just happen to see the fire?" Mahmoud applied his ointment to a strip of clean cloth. "Other boy, friend, long time. Called me, asked help. I lived here in island, other side. Saw smoke and fire, got you some river water, and helped." "Callum called you?" Graham asked incredulously. "But he's the one who told Blades I knew about the drugs." Mahmoud nodded as he began treating Graham's burns, dabbing the ointment onto the worst areas and wrapping them in the cloth strips. "Yes, he afraid. Told bad men about you, then feel bad. Call me to watch you." Graham hissed as the ointment stung his raw skin, but the pain quickly gave way to a cooling sensation. "So Callum betrayed me to save himself, then tried to help me out of guilt." "People complicated," Mahmoud said simply. "Do bad things? Then try good things." As Mahmoud finished treating the burns, Graham's mind turned to his family. Seeing them on that screen, older but unmistakably his, Marla, his Lena, his Chloe, had reignited a hope he'd thought long extinguished. But Mahmoud had confirmed Noah was dead, murdered by the traffickers and his body disposed of in the crocodile-infested river. The grief of that knowledge warred with the desperate need to save the rest of his family. "Mahmoud," Graham said, his voice steady despite his pain, "I need to find my wife and daughters. Do you know where Blades might be keeping them?" Mahmoud carefully packed away his remaining supplies. "Yes, hidden place, old cattle farm in Mitchell Plateau. They keep drugs there, and people too." "We need to go there," Graham insisted. "Now." Mahmoud shook his head. "Not with car. Too dangerous. They have many guns, many men. We walk through bush, hidden. Then you call police." He held up a satellite phone Graham hadn't noticed before. "I stole this long time ago. Maybe time to use it." Graham nodded, understanding the wisdom of stealth over a frontal assault. He was in no condition to fight, and Blades clearly had many men at his disposal. Their best chance was to locate his family, then call in the authorities. "Let's go," Graham said, rising to his feet with new determination. Despite the pain of his burns and the grief of learning about Noah's fate, a fierce resolve had taken hold. He would save what remained of his family or die trying. Mahmoud drove as far as he dared, taking rough back trails through the dense Kimberley bushland. Eventually, he pulled the truck into a hidden gully, concealing it beneath overhanging branches. "We walk from here," he whispered, gesturing for Graham to follow him. "Stay low, stay quiet." Graham nodded, his treated burns still painful but manageable thanks to Mahmoud's care. They set off on foot, moving carefully through the scrubby terrain. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but Graham barely noticed the heat, his mind focused entirely on the mission ahead. After about an hour of slow progress, they reached the edge of a clearing. Crouching behind a cluster of rocks, Mahmoud pointed to a compound in the distance, a collection of weather-beaten buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence. From their vantage point, Graham could see men patrolling the perimeter, rifles slung across their backs. "Old cattle station," Mahmoud explained in a low voice. "They use for drug. Hide in remote place where police not come." Graham studied the layout, trying to determine which building might house his family. "How many men do they have?" "Maybe 15, 20, Mahmoud replied. "Too many for us." Graham knew he was right. They would need help. "Let me use your phone." Mahmoud handed over the satellite phone, and Graham dialed the emergency number for the Western Australia Police. When the operator answered, he identified himself and quickly explained the situation: the kidnapping, the drug operation, and the location of the compound. To his surprise, the operator informed him that a search and rescue operation had already been mobilized. "We received a tip approximately 30 minutes ago from a man named Callum Rourke," she explained. "Units are en route to your location now." Graham was stunned. Callum had not only warned Mahmoud, but had also contacted the authorities himself. Perhaps there was more to the young man than Graham had given him credit for. He shared their precise location with the operator, who instructed them to remain hidden until police arrived. "They're approaching with caution," she advised. "The trafficking operation is believed to be heavily armed." As Graham ended the call, movement at the compound caught his attention. A group of men were emerging from one of the buildings, escorting 3 figures toward a waiting jeep. Even from a distance, Graham recognized his wife and daughters. His heart leapt at the sight of them alive, but plummeted as he realized they were being taken away. "They're moving them," he whispered urgently to Mahmoud. "We can't wait for the police." Mahmoud peered through the brush. "They put something in jackets, in shoes. Drug packages." Graham watched as one of the men roughly handled Marla, forcing her into the jeep. "They're using them as mules," he realized. "If they're caught with drugs on them?" "Bad men disappear, your family in prison," Mahmoud finished grimly. Graham couldn't let that happen. "We need to follow them." They retreated to Mahmoud's truck and set off, taking a parallel route to avoid being spotted. Graham kept the jeep in sight as it traveled along a dirt road, heading deeper into the plateau. Eventually, it stopped in a small clearing where another vehicle was waiting, a black SUV with tinted windows. Graham and Mahmoud parked a safe distance away and continued on foot, creeping close enough to observe without being detected. They watched as the traffickers forced Marla, Lena, and Chloe to put on jackets and shoes laden with hidden drug packages. When Marla resisted, one of the men grabbed Chloe by the hair, pressing a gun to her temple. "Do as we say, or your daughter dies," the man threatened loud enough for Graham to hear. "Your husband is already dead. No one's coming to save you." Graham clenched his fists, every fiber of his being screaming to rush forward and protect his family. But such an action would be suicide, and would likely get them all killed. He forced himself to remain hidden, continuing to observe as the traffickers prepared to transfer his family to the waiting SUV. Just as the handoff was about to take place, the distant sound of helicopter rotors broke the silence. Everyone in the clearing froze, looking skyward. 2 police helicopters appeared over the ridge, one heading directly for their position, the other continuing toward the compound. Chaos erupted. The traffickers drew their weapons, firing wildly at the approaching helicopter while scrambling to complete the transfer. Graham saw Blades emerge from the jeep, shouting orders to his men. Through his satellite phone, Graham could hear the police operator providing updates. Ground units were converging on both locations, coordinating with the helicopters for a simultaneous raid. "They're taking my family!" Graham shouted into the phone as one of Blade's men began herding Marla, Lena, and Chloe toward a third vehicle that had appeared at the edge of the clearing. The police were engaged with the main group of traffickers, unaware that 3 hostages were being spirited away. Graham made a split-second decision. "Mahmoud, we need to block that truck. It's our only chance." Mahmoud nodded, understanding immediately. They raced back to his pickup, and Mahmoud gunned the engine, driving straight toward the clearing. He swerved around the gunfight between police and traffickers, aiming directly for the truck that was about to carry away Graham's family. The pickup slammed into the side of the truck just as the trafficker was forcing Lena into the back seat. The impact knocked the man off balance, giving Graham the opportunity to leap from Mahmoud's vehicle and tackle him to the ground. They struggled fiercely, the trafficker's superior strength nearly overwhelming Graham. But years of grief and rage fueled Graham's determination as he pinned the man down, landing punch after punch until his opponent went limp. "Dad?" A trembling voice broke through Graham's fury. He looked up to see Lena staring at him, her eyes wide with disbelief and hope. "Lena!" he gasped, scrambling to his feet and pulling his daughter into his arms. She felt so different from the young woman in his memories, taller, thinner, harder somehow, but unmistakably his child. Chloe was next, rushing to join the embrace. "Is it really you?" she sobbed, clinging to him. "I'm here," Graham assured them, tears streaming down his face. "I'm here now." He looked for Marla, expecting her to join their reunion. Instead, he saw her slumped against the truck, a dark stain spreading across her shirt. One of the stray bullets fired at the helicopter had found her. "Marla!" Graham cried, rushing to his wife's side. He cradled her in his arms, pressing his hand to the wound in a futile attempt to stop the bleeding. Marla's eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with effort. "Graham," she whispered, "you found them." "I found all of you," he corrected, his voice breaking. "Hold on, Marla. Help is coming." But the light was already fading from her eyes. "Take care of our girls," she murmured, her hand weakly squeezing his. Her final breath escaped in a soft sigh, her body going limp in Graham's arms. He howled in anguish, a primal sound of loss that carried across the clearing, momentarily drowning out the gunfire and helicopter rotors. Lena and Chloe rushed to their mother's side, their cries joining Graham's as the reality of losing her in the very moment of their reunion crashed over them. Mahmoud, who had been securing the trafficker Graham had fought, now stood guard over the grieving family, his weathered face solemn. Around them, the police operation continued. More officers arrived, apprehending the surviving traffickers. Medical personnel rushed to treat the wounded. Through a haze of grief, Graham was vaguely aware of someone trying to pull him away from Marla's body, of voices asking questions he couldn't process. All he could focus on were his daughters, the children he had believed lost forever, now returned to him at the very moment he'd lost their mother. The cruel symmetry was unbearable, yet he had to bear it. For them, for Marla. Mahmoud helped shepherd the girls to safety as the police secured the area. Graham followed in a daze, his wife's blood still wet on his hands, his mind struggling to reconcile the joy of finding his daughters with the agony of losing Marla. As they were led to a safe area away from the ongoing operation, Graham held his daughters close, their family forever altered but partially restored. They had survived. They were together again. And somehow they would find a way forward, carrying Marla in their hearts. The police force swarmed the clearing, securing the site with military precision. Graham watched numbly as officers in tactical gear handcuffed Blades and his associates, leading them to waiting transport vehicles. Some would be taken by helicopter, others by boat, back to the mainland. A female officer wrapped a shock blanket around Graham's shoulders, gently guiding him toward a medical station that had been set up nearby. His daughters were already there, being examined by paramedics. They looked up when he approached, their faces still streaked with tears. "Dad," Lena called, reaching for him. At 34, she had grown into a woman with her mother's serious eyes and determined chin. 12 years of captivity had hardened her, yet there was still something of the 22-year-old girl he remembered. Chloe, now 32, sat beside her sister, her hands clutching a paper cup of water that trembled with her movements. She had been just 20 when she disappeared, still a child. Now she was a woman who had endured horrors Graham could only begin to imagine. A medic approached to examine Graham's burns. "Someone treated these," the woman noted, with professional curiosity. "Who did this?" Graham looked around for Mahmoud, suddenly realizing he hadn't seen the Indonesian man since they'd reached the medical station. There was a man, an Indonesian. He saved my life, treated my burns. Where is he? The medic shook her head. "I haven't seen anyone matching that description. Let me ask around." As she moved away, a senior police officer approached. "Mr. Ellery, I'm Superintendent Harper. I need to ask you a few questions when you're up to it." Graham nodded wearily. "My wife, Marla, her body?" "Being treated with all due respect, sir," Harper assured him. "We'll arrange transport back to Derby when the medical team clears you all to travel." Graham noticed officers leading a handcuffed man toward one of the helicopters. It was Mahmoud, his head bowed, his wrists secured behind his back. "Wait!" Graham called out, struggling to his feet. "That man saved my life. Where are you taking him?" Superintendent Harper placed a restraining hand on Graham's arm. "That's Mahmoud Rajasa, Mr. Ellery. He's been on Indonesia's most wanted list for over 15 years, a major drug trafficker who fled to Australia to escape the death penalty in his home country. We've been looking for him for a long time." "But he saved me," Graham protested. "He helped me find my family." "And we'll take that into consideration," Harper promised. "But he's still a wanted criminal who needs to face justice. He'll be deported to Indonesia to stand trial there." Graham knew what that meant. Indonesia's drug laws were among the harshest in the world, with trafficking carrying a mandatory death sentence. The man who had saved him from burning alive would be executed for his past crimes. Before Graham could argue further, one of the paramedics approached. "We're ready to transport your family to Derby Hospital, Mr. Ellery. The helicopter is standing by." Graham reluctantly allowed himself to be led to the waiting medical helicopter, his daughters following close behind. As they were lifted into the air, Graham watched the landscape of the Mitchell Plateau recede below them. Somewhere down there, Noah's remains had been scattered years ago, feeding the crocodiles of the Kimberley River. They would never be able to give him a proper burial, never be able to say goodbye properly. The flight to Derby passed in a blur of grief, pain, and exhaustion. At the hospital, Graham and his daughters were separated for treatment. His burns needed further care, and the girls required comprehensive medical examinations after their long captivity. Hours later, they were reunited in a private room arranged by the police. Graham sat between his daughters' beds, holding a hand of each as they slept, sedated by doctors concerned about their psychological state. He hadn't been able to speak with them properly yet, to hear their story or tell them his. That would come later, when they were stronger. A soft knock at the door roused him from his vigil. Superintendent Harper entered, accompanied by another officer. "Mr. Ellery," Harper said quietly, mindful of the sleeping women. "We need to take your formal statement now, if you're up to it." Graham carefully disengaged from his daughter's grips and followed the officers to a small consultation room down the hall. There, he recounted everything: his encounter with Callum, the discovery of the drugs in his home, the kidnapping by the fake police officers, his rescue by Mahmoud, and finally the confrontation at the clearing that had resulted in Marla's death. "What about Detective Marr?" Graham asked when he'd finished his account. "I tried to contact him when all this started. Where is he?" Harper and the other officer exchanged glances. "Detective Marr resigned from the force 3 years ago," Harper explained. "There was an internal investigation into allegations of negligence and possible corruption in several cases, including your children's disappearance. He left before the investigation was completed." "Are you saying he was involved with Blades and the trafficking operation?" Graham demanded. "Is that why our children's case went cold so quickly?" "We can't confirm that yet," Harper said carefully. "But given recent events, we're reopening all of Marr's old cases. If he was compromised, we'll find the evidence." Graham sat back, processing this new betrayal. If Marr had been corrupt, if he deliberately sabotaged the investigation to protect Blades' operation, then he was partially responsible for the 12 years of hell his family had endured. "What about Callum Rourke?" Graham asked. "He's the one who set me up, told Blades I knew about the operation." "Mr. Rourke turned himself in at the Derby police station this morning," Harper informed him. "He's been cooperating fully, providing valuable information about the trafficking network. He's the one who alerted us to your kidnapping and gave us the location of the compound." Graham was conflicted. Callum had betrayed him to Blades, yet he'd also tried to save him by contacting both Mahmoud and the police. "I want to speak with him," Graham decided. "That can be arranged," Harper agreed, "but not tonight. You need rest, and we need to finish processing the suspects we've already arrested." Graham returned to his daughter's room, his mind spinning with all he'd learned. He settled back into the chair between their beds, keeping watch as they slept, afraid they might disappear again if he closed his eyes. Eventually, exhaustion overcame him, and he drifted into an uneasy sleep filled with dreams of burning shacks, crocodile-infested rivers, and Marla's face as the life faded from her eyes. The following morning, Graham and his daughters were moved to a more comfortable room at the Derby Hospital. The police had arranged for a psychologist to be present when the girls were ready to talk about their ordeal. As they ate a simple breakfast provided by the hospital, there was an awkward silence between them. 12 years of separation creating a chasm none of them knew how to bridge. "I can't believe you found us," Lena finally said, breaking the silence. "We'd given up hope years ago." Graham set down his coffee cup. "I never stopped looking. Not really. Even when everyone else said you were gone, something in me couldn't accept it." Chloe, who had barely spoken since their rescue, looked up from her untouched toast. "Mom never gave up either, did she?" Graham's throat tightened. "Never. She kept working, kept going, because she had to believe you were out there somewhere." "And now she's gone," Chloe whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Just when we found each other again." Graham moved to sit on the edge of Chloe's bed, gathering her into his arms as she began to sob. Lena joined them, the three of them clinging to each other in shared grief. When they had composed themselves, Superintendent Harper arrived with the promised psychologist, a gentle-voiced woman named Dr. Winters. "If you're ready," Harper said, "we'd like to hear your story now." The girls exchanged glances, then nodded. With Dr. Winters present to provide support, they began to recount what had happened 12 years ago. "We were sailing to Hidden Reef Cay that day," Lena began. "It was supposed to be just a fun day out. Swimming, sunbathing. Noah seemed strange once we anchored, though. He disappeared for a while, and Chloe and I went looking for him. We found him on the other side of the quay," Chloe continued. "He was with these men, handing them a package. When they saw us watching, Noah tried to get us to leave quickly, but they were suspicious." Lena picked up the narrative. They demanded to know who we were. Noah said we were his sisters, that we didn't know anything. But they were paranoid. One of them was clearly high on something. They started arguing about what to do with us. Noah tried to protect us, Chloe said, her voice breaking. When one of them grabbed me, Noah fought back. That's when one of them stabbed him. Graham closed his eyes, the pain of hearing about his son's final moments almost unbearable. They dragged us to their boat, Lena continued after a moment. Noah was still alive, bleeding badly. We begged them to get him help, but they took us all to a remote spot on the Kimberly River. She faltered. They threw him into the river, Chloe finished, her voice hollow. He was still alive when they did it. We saw the crocodiles. Dr. Winters offered tissues as both girls wept at the memory. Graham fought back his own tears, needing to hear the rest. After that, they drugged us, Lena resumed once she'd regained some composure. We woke up inland, at a different location than the one you found us at. Over the years, they moved us around a lot, always remote places in the Kimberly region. Eventually, we ended up at that cattle station compound. They used us as drug mules, Chloe explained. We'd have packages hidden in our clothing or sewn into our luggage, and they'd take us to handoff points. No one ever suspected 2 young women would be carrying drugs. If we refused or tried to escape, they'd hurt one of us to punish the other, Lena added. Once they threw a girl off the same cliff where they'd disposed of Noah, just to show us they would do it. Another captive? Harper asked, making notes. Lena nodded. There were others over the years. Some escaped. Some died. Some just disappeared. Did you ever see an Indonesian man named Mahmud at the compound? Harper inquired. Yes, in the early years, Chloe confirmed. He seemed different from the others, less cruel. He stopped coming around maybe 5 or 6 years ago. We heard the others saying they were looking for him, that he'd betrayed them somehow. Graham thought of Mahmud, now facing extradition and a death sentence in Indonesia. The man had tried to atone for his part in the operation by saving Graham's life. What about Detective Marr? Graham asked. Did you ever see him with these people? The girls exchanged another look. No, Lena answered carefully. But we heard them mention a friend at the station several times, someone who made sure no one looked too closely at their operation. Harper made another note. That's consistent with our suspicions about Marr. We'll find him. As the interview continued, a nurse entered to inform Harper that Callum Rourke had arrived at the hospital and was asking to speak with Graham. Bring him in, Graham decided. I want to hear what he has to say. Callum entered the room looking pale and haggard, his hands fidgeting nervously at his sides. He faltered when he saw Lena and Chloe, recognition and shame washing over his features. You probably hate me, he said to Graham. I don't blame you. Why did you do it, Callum? Graham asked. Why did you call Blades when I left your place? Callum looked down at his feet. I was terrified. For 12 years, I've been looking over my shoulder, waiting for them to decide I was a liability. When you showed up asking questions, I panicked. You set me up to be killed, Graham said flatly. I know, Callum admitted, and as soon as I did it, I knew it was wrong. That's why I called Mahmud. I knew he lived out in the bush somewhere, that he might be able to help if he saw what was happening. And then I went to the police. Why now, after all these years? Graham pressed. Callum finally looked up, meeting Graham's eyes. Because I couldn't live with it anymore. Seeing you, hearing you talk about your children, it brought everything back. All the guilt I've been trying to drown with fishing and isolation. Graham studied the man before him. Callum had been a coward 12 years ago, choosing his own safety over the truth. He'd been a coward yesterday, too, setting Graham up to save himself. But in the end, he'd found a small measure of courage. I'll never forgive you for staying silent all these years, Graham told him honestly. But thank you for finally doing the right thing. Callum nodded, accepting this judgment. As he was led away by a police officer, Graham turned back to his daughters, ready to hear the rest of their story and begin the long process of healing. The days that followed brought a whirlwind of activity. The police raid on the trafficking compound yielded massive amounts of evidence, not only about the drug operation, but also about a network of corruption that had protected it for years. Detective Marr was located and arrested in Perth, where he'd been living under a different name. Mahmoud Rajasa was indeed extradited to Indonesia, despite Graham's testimony about his heroic actions. The Australian government, however, lodged a formal request for clemency with the Indonesian authorities, citing his cooperation and assistance in rescuing hostages. Marla's funeral was held a week after the rescue, attended by what seemed like the entire population of Derby. The same community that had whispered about Graham's drinking for years now rallied around the family, offering support and sympathy. As they stood at Marla's graveside, Graham with an arm around each of his daughters, he made them a solemn promise. "I will be the father you deserve now. I will protect you, help you rebuild your lives, give you anything you need." "We just need you, Dad," Lena said, leaning against his shoulder. Sober and present. "You have me," Graham assured them, "always." Later, in the quiet of their home, a home that still bore traces of Marla in every corner, they sat together in the living room, surrounded by photographs of happier times. A picture of Noah, laughing in his holiday hat, sat prominently on the mantelpiece. "We should have a memorial for him, too," Chloe suggested. "Even without a body, he deserves to be remembered properly." Graham nodded. "We will, and for all the others who didn't make it back." As twilight settled over Derby, the three survivors of the Ellery family held each other close, bound by shared grief and traumatic experiences, but also by the unbreakable bonds of family. They had lost so much, 12 years together, Noah, and now Marla, but they had found each other again. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be nightmares, therapy sessions, court appearances as the trafficking case proceeded. There would be days when the weight of their losses would feel unbearable. But there would also be healing, gradually and imperfectly, day by day. As darkness fell, Graham looked at his daughters, women now, not the young faces he remembered, but saw in them echoes of their mother's strength, their brother's courage, and something uniquely their own that had helped them survive unimaginable circumstances. "We'll be okay," he told them, and for the first time in 12 years, he believed it might be true.